I woke up with blood on my hands, and I don't remember what I did last night. At first, I thought I was dreaming. The room was dim, lit only by the weak light slipping through the blinds, and the silence pressed against me from every direction. But then I looked down my hands. They were trembling uncontrollably, slick with a dark, dried substance. It caught the faint morning light and glimmered almost unnaturally, thick and stubborn. I tried to rub it off, but it clung to me. I lifted my sleeve and froze. My shirt was ripped in several places, the fabric frayed and blood-stained, as though a struggle had taken place. The weight of the unknown pressed on me in a way that made my stomach twist. MY phone lay on the floor. Screen cracked in a jagged line, a hairline fracture cutting across the icons I no longer recognized. I bent to pick it up, hoping it would contain answers, text notifications, a call log, but offered nothing. The last hours of the night were gone. Empty, wiped clean, the apartment itself felt different. Normally familiar, it now seemed alien. Every corner seemed sharper, every shadow longer. Even the furniture seemed slightly out of place, and a faint metallic smell lingered in the air, almost imperceptible at first, then growing stronger as I moved from room to room. It clung to my clothes, to my hair, as though the night had left a residue I couldn't wash away as I stumbled toward the bathroom, my reflection in the cracked mirror catching my attention. At first glance, I looked the same, but there was something in my eyes, a tension I couldn't explain. My pupils were dilated, and my jaw felt tight. I tried to smile, just to reassure myself that everything was normal, but the reflection staring back at me wasn't reassuring. It seemed sharper, more aware, like it had seen things I hadn't yet remembered. I looked at my hands again. The blood was warm, sticky, and dark wasn't mine. I could feel it in my bones. It carried a weight, a history, that my mind refused to name. Whose blood was it? And why couldn't I remember a single thing from the night? My thoughts raced, circling the same questions over and over, each one more urgent than the last. I moved toward the window. The city outside looked ordinary at first glance. Cars moved along familiar streets. Early risers walked dogs. Neighbors opened their blinds. But the quiet felt unusual, too complete. Even the distant hum of traffic seemed muted, as if the world itself had paused, leaving me alone in the aftermath of something that had already happened. My body felt wrong. My muscles ached, not from sleep, but from movement I could not recall. Every joint was tight, every fiber tense. It was as if I had run, fought, struggled, yet my memory offered no trace of such effort. I tried to remember my last conscious thought, my last real action before the blackout, but the mind that should have remembered simply wouldn't cooperate. There was a sound, faint at first, almost drowned out by the quiet of the morning, a scratching, low and deliberate, from somewhere just beyond the walls. I froze, straining to hear. It stopped, then started again. Somewhere in the room, something had moved, something that hadn't been there when I went to bed. I took a step back, and my foot pressed into something soft. I glanced down. Another streak of blood, darker, fresher, leading toward the doorway. My heart pounded. I wanted to scream, to call someone, but my throat felt constricted, dry. My mind searched for logic, for reason, for any explanation that made sense, but found none. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands shaking, eyes darting around the apartment. And that's when I noticed a faint imprint of footprints, muddy, smeared, leading to the living room. I hadn't been outside. Or had I? The memory was gone, leaving only question that clawed at the edges of my consciousness. I tried to piece together what had happened, but every fragment I pulled forward dissolved before I could grasp it. The blood, the scratches on my arms, the odd tension in my body, the strange sounds, all of it pointed to events that my mind refused to let me see. It was as if the night had been real, violent, and unrelenting, yet deliberately erased from my memory. I checked the windows again, hoping to see something that might explain the absence of memory, something that might anchor me to reality. But the street remained unnervingly calm, normal in every way, which made the contrast all the more disturbing. Somewhere out there, something had happened, something that had left traces in my body and in my mind, and yet the world moved on as if nothing had occurred. And then it hit me that the night wasn't over. Every instinct screamed at me that whatever had happened, it had left its mark. It is in the air in my muscles, in the echoes of sound bouncing off the walls. I could feel it, a subtle pull, a presence I cannot define, urging me to understand yet warning me to stop. If this had happened to you, would you call the police? Or would you sit in the quiet, trying desperately to remember what had slipped away, wondering if the truth was something you could bear to see? I kept trying to pull pieces of the night back into focus, but the memory was stubborn, fragmented. The last thing I could remember was sitting on the edge of my bed, phone in hand, scrolling through notifications half unread, the room quiet except for the faint hum of the city outside. Everything felt normal then, or at least as normal as it ever felt. I had no idea how quickly that sense of safety would vanish that I remember hearing for the first time a soft sound, almost imperceptible, a scratch, a whisper of movement against a window frame. At first, I thought it was the wind or maybe a branch swaying against the glass. But there was rhythm to it, deliberate, slow, patient. It stopped when I moved closer, only to start again once I turned away. I told myself it was nothing. That's what we always tell ourselves when the air suddenly feels wrong. At the time, I ignored it. I should have. I remember the restless feeling that began to creep over me as I sat there. My fingers drummed against the side of the bed, my heart beating faster than it had any right to. It was a subtle unease at first, something I couldn't put into words. It was like the room itself was aware of me, watching, waiting. I kept glancing toward the window, but all I saw were the familiar shapes of neighboring buildings and the soft glow of streetlights. Yet the sensation didn't fade. It pressed against me from the corners of the room, an invisible presence I could feel, but could not identify. And then I heard it more clearly, a low, uneven breathing someone or something just beyond the glass. I froze, staring at the window until the sound stopped, but my skin was crawling. Every hair on my arm stood at attention. My body knew what my mind could not yet admit. I was not alone. I remember looking out the window and catching a glimpse of movement across the alley. A shadow, tall and crouched in an unnatural way, disappeared behind a dumpster before I could get a clear look. My neighbor's lights flicked on a moment later, and I saw them moving across the room, pacing back and forth, whispering to themselves. Something about the way they moved felt wrong, off, as if they were hiding from or protecting themselves from something outside. The city itself felt different that night. Normally, the distant dog barks, car horns, and faint music from open windows blended into a comforting hum. But on that night, every sound felt sharp, jarring. Animal howls echoed across the street, closer than they should have been. Not the usual stray dogs, but long, drawn-out, guttural sound that sent a chill down my spine. I could feel the vibrations in the floor, in the walls. That sound, it wasn't human. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, that the alcohol from a couple of beers earlier was making my senses overreact. But the restlessness in my body was real. My legs refused to stay still. My fingers flexed and flexed on the bedsheet, as if seeking some motion I could not name. And the longer I stayed in that room, the more the world outside began to feel alien. Shadows seemed to stretch, corners grew darker, and even familiar objects in my apartment took on strange angles, subtle distortions that made me question my own eyes. I remember feeling drawn toward the window. I wanted to know what was there, to confront it, but something warned me to stay back. A primal instinct I could not explain rooted me to the floor, and then the wind, or what I thought was wind, shifted, carried with a scent, raw and metallic, sharp and faintly sweet, unlike anything I had ever smelled. It touched my skin and I gagged. It wasn't a smell I could place, but my body recognized it. Danger, presence, something alive, waiting to... I remember glimpsing the neighbor again. They peeked through their curtains, eyes wide, then quickly stepped back. It was the way they froze, the way their body tensed, that finally made me feel the gravity of the night. There was something out there that neither of us could name, something that had crossed into our streets, into our lives, and was somehow watching, calculating. And then the moon rose. I had almost forgotten. A large, bright full moon, suspended in the sky, spilling its pale light across the rooftops. Its glow hit my window and reflected off the walls, the blood on my hands, the torn fabric of my shirt. It illuminated everything, and yet revealed nothing. I felt a pull toward it I could not explain, a subtle tension running through my body that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with something else, something I did not understand. That's when it all started to fade. My vision blurred slightly, the room spun, and my thoughts became hazy. I remember thinking that I should step away from the window, sit down and ground myself, but it was too late. My body moved, yes, but I was no longer fully in control. Memory, perception, reason all slipping away as the night swallowed me whole. The last thing I remember before everything went black was a sound right behind me. A scraping, a shuffling, almost like claws dragging against the floor. I turned, slowly, and the hair on the back of my neck stood straight. Whatever it was, it had been inside the room. And then darkness, silence, forgetfulness. I woke up again, but it wasn't in my bed this time. My eyes opened a harsh, gray light of morning spilling across the floor. The first thing I noticed was the floor itself, a dark trail leading from the bedroom to the doorway. Blood, fresh, sticky, and smeared. My stomach sank. I didn't remember walking. I didn't remember bleeding. Yet here it was, winding across the carpet like a breadcrumb trail of something I couldn't recall. I followed it slowly, almost mechanically, as if my body was leading me where my mind refused to go. Each step revealed more evidence of the night I could not remember. Mud footprints, bare and uneven, marked the tiles. Someone or something had been moving around. I looked at my hands again. Scratches, deep and raw, ran along my forearms, tiny lines of red tracing the edges of bruises I hadn't noticed before. My shirt was torn even more than I had realized, and the blood on it seemed older mixed with the new. My heart pounded as I realized the full extent. My body had been active in ways I couldn't explain, and whatever had happened, it had left a record. I'd picked up my phone. The screen flickered weakly. Notifications popped up, but more than anything, I wanted to see the time. It didn't make sense. Hours were gone completely. Calls I didn't make, messages I couldn't recall sending, apps open that I hadn't touched. It was as if the phone itself had been a witness, holding fragments of a night. My mind refused to admit, and my legs shook. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone had broken in. Maybe I had been sleepwalking. Maybe I had a blackout from drinking. Any explanation seemed too simple, too safe. I couldn't accept it. And yet the evidence in front of me, my own body, told a story I couldn't remember. I walked to the window and switched on the news. A live report flickered across the screen. Authorities investigate animal attack in residential area. One person was injured. Witnesses report unusual behavior in local wildlife. My stomach tightened. The map showed a street just a few blocks away from me. Could it be connected? Was this what had happened last night? Or had I witnessed something else entirely? I tried to ground myself in rational thought. Maybe someone had hurt themselves nearby. Maybe the report was coincidental. But my pulse was rapid, my mind refusing to settle. Every instinct screamed that this was related to me, to what I had done, or what had happened to me. I went back into the bedroom, scanning every corner. The blood trail continued toward the door. My shoes were near the closet, muddied, as if I had walked outside barefoot. The realization made me freeze. I had no memory of leaving the apartment. None. And yet the marks on the floor told a different story. Someone had walked in, or I had walked out, and the proof was there under my own eyes that I checked the mirror. I froze. My eyes didn't look right. The pupils were darker, the whites tinged red. My skin felt warmer than it should have. The fine hairs on my arms raised as though anticipating something. I lifted my arm and saw the scratches again. They were deeper than before, and small bruises circled them like faint warnings. My reflection stared back at me, human enough to be familiar, but foreign enough to make my stomach twist. I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to think. How much of last night had I truly lived? How much had I simply existed as a witness to my own body? I remembered the sound outside my window, the scratching, the breathing, and then the full moon. It was still high in the sky when the morning light began to filter through, hanging bright and round, spilling shadows across the room. Something about it called to me, tugged at my awareness, and I realized that the night might not have been over, that whatever had happened was still influencing me, that I glanced back at the blood trail leading to the door. I imagined retracing it, following it outside, but fear held me back. My hands shook, my breath came short. Every instinct told me that looking further would reveal the truth, the thing my mind refused to name. And yet I wanted to know. I wanted to confront the reality that my body, my apartment, and even the world outside seemed to be whispering at me. I thought of the news report again. Someone had been injured, perhaps killed. Could it have been me? Could I have done something in the darkness that my mind refused to remember? Denial warred with fear, and I found myself trapped in a loop, wanting answers but too terrified to look at while thoughts scattered. I remembered the neighbor again, pacing, whispering to themselves, watching the windows. I remembered the strange howls, echoing in alleys and rooftops. My pulse raced. The room seemed smaller, tighter, and the evidence of the night I couldn't recall pressed on me from every angle. And then I whispered to myself the question that would not leave my lips. What would you do if your own body told a story you couldn't remember? What would you do if the person in the mirror was both yourself and something else entirely? By late morning, I realized I couldn't ignore what had happened or what I might have done. The blood, the scratches, the missing hours, it was too much to dismiss. I needed answers. I picked up my phone again, hands still trembling, and started retracing the fragments I could find. Messages I didn't remember sending, calls I didn't make, photos I hadn't taken. Each file, each recording felt like a clue left by someone else, someone I barely recognized. I opened security footage from my apartment building. At first, everything seemed ordinary. People coming and going, cars passing, the usual life of the block. Then something caught my eye, a blur on the stairs, moving far too fast to be human. At first, I thought it was a glitch, but the movement repeated was too erratic, too fluid, almost predatory. The figure, if it was a figure at all, leapt from the shadows with an unnatural strength, landing silently, then vanishing from the camera's view. I wasn't ready for what I saw next. That my pulse accelerated. I watched the footage again, frame by frame, trying to make sense of it. Whoever, or whatever was moved in ways that defied logic. Limbs bent strangely, speed impossible, presence overwhelming. And then I noticed the small details. Claws, long shadows, a posture that wasn't entirely human. My stomach twisted. Something had been in my apartment. Something powerful. Something fast that I scoured the internet, searching for any explanation for symptoms I had noticed. The missing time, the sudden burst of strength, the heightened senses I hadn't understood until that moment. Articles spoke of rare conditions, sleep disorders, animal attacks, but nothing fit the pattern I felt in my bones. Every search brought me closer to answers I wasn't sure I wanted. The pieces didn't fit together. Yet each article seemed to nod at the truth lurking just beyond my comprehension. Blackouts, enhanced strength, hunger, instincts I couldn't control. I swallowed hard. I didn't want to believe it. And yet the signs were undeniable. I reached out to someone I trusted, a friend who lived nearby, hoping to find a sounding board, someone who could tell me I was overreacting. I described the scratches, the blood, the strange noises. I spoke carefully, avoiding the parts that made my stomach churn. But even then, I could hear the skepticism in their voice. And yet when I mentioned the animal attacks, the news reports, the neighbor pacing at night, their tone shifted. Alarm, fear. They hadn't seen it directly, but they had felt it, too. And that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I returned to footage once more, desperate for clarity. And that's when everything stopped making sense. In one frame, blurry and grainy, I saw it clearly, or at least as clearly as the camera allowed. Something crouched in the corner of the hallway, moving with impossible speed and strength. Its eyes caught the dim light, reflecting an amber glow that made my stomach turn. The movement was aggressive, fluid, and terrifyingly controlled. My own body recoiled as if it remembered what I could not. And yet, the footage also showed my own silhouette in the apartment at the same time. I saw myself, or what appeared to be me, in positions I had no memory of. My arms raised, hands clawing, body bent and twisted in ways that should have been impossible. My mind scrambled. Maybe it wasn't me. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe the camera had captured something else. But the scratches, the blood, the bruises my own body could not lie. I had been there, and yet I didn't remember a single second. The news reports had grown more urgent. Police had been dispatched to nearby streets. Residents claimed to see a creature, moving faster than any human, vanishing before anyone could reach it. Some described a figure hunched over, almost bestial, its movements deliberate and terrifying. And my pulse raced as I realized, if these reports were true, if what I had seen on the footage was true, I was not alone. And the implications were more horrifying than I could articulate. The neighbors' behavior began to make sense, or at least I thought it did. They had been pacing, whispering, observing, hiding perhaps from something that prowled the night, something that might be the same as what I had become or had witnessed in myself. Fear and denial collided inside me, and I felt my body tense, aching, restless. Something had changed, something fundamental, and I could sense it in every nerve, every heartbeat. I tried to rationalize, tried to tell myself there was an explanation. Maybe someone had been stalking the building. Maybe the reports were exaggerated. Maybe the footage was corrupted. But deep down, I knew the truth was closer than I wanted to admit. There was a pattern here, a connection I could feel, but not see. The blackouts, the scratches, the bursts of strength, the animalistic movements, they were all part of something I was only beginning to understand. Something alive. That's when I realized the most terrifying possibility. Maybe I wasn't just a witness to the night. Maybe I had been an actor. Maybe the figure in the footage, moving with impossible speed, wasn't just someone else. Maybe it had been me, and the memory that should have anchored me had been stolen or suppressed or lost entirely. My hand shook as I reached for the footage again. I stared at the screen, frame after frame, until the glow of the monitor burned into my eyes. I could feel my pulse echoing through my skull. Heightened senses, bursts of strength, the blackouts during the full moon, all lined up in a way I didn't want to admit. I wanted to turn it off, to close my eyes, to pretend the evidence didn't exist. But something compelled me to watch, to see, to confront what my own body had done while my mind slept. And as I leaned closer, I whispered to myself the thought that refused to leave my mind. Maybe the night had already begun again, and I hadn't even noticed. By late afternoon, I knew something inside me was shifting. I could feel an edge sharpening in my senses, a tension coiling in every muscle. The hum of the city became overwhelming. I could hear voices through walls, faint footsteps down the street, the rustling of leaves in the alley. Sounds I never noticed before struck me with clarity, each one slicing through my thoughts. My ears ached from the intensity, yet I couldn't turn it off. Hunger clawed at me next, raw and violent. It was a gnawing ache deep in my stomach, something primal, demanding. My teeth felt sharper. My nails, I realized in horror, were longer, tipped in pale curves that weren't there before. I flexed my fingers, staring in disbelief as the edges of my nails scratched against each other with a faint, metallic rasp. My hands were changing, becoming weapons I didn't recognize, instruments of something I could barely control. I paced the apartment, trying to ground myself. Each shadow seemed to move differently, each sound louder, more deliberate. Aggression surged through me for no reason. I clenched my fists, then released them, shaking, my heart hammering as if warning me. Something in me was ready to snap, ready to lash out. I didn't know who or what would target first. And then the blackout began. A wave of dizziness, disorientation, and nausea hit me all at once. The edges of reality blurred. I stumbled, gripping the walls, trying to hold on to the fragments of my mind. But the control, I thought I had slipped away like sand through my fingers. My vision darkened at the corners. My breathing came in short, ragged gasps. Panic surged. This was happening again. I could feel it. I was becoming what I had only glimpsed in the footage, in the neighbors' whispers, in the police reports. And as the blackout fully claimed me, fear gripped my chest, not what had already happened, but what I might do next. Hours later, or maybe minutes, I couldn't tell. My vision cleared just enough to realize I was outside. The city streets were empty, eerily quiet. I could smell things, people, animals, metal mingling in ways I had never noticed before. I could hear the distant hum of a dog barking blocks away, the flutter of pigeons lifting from a rooftop. And that's when I saw the first witness. They were crouched behind a fence, trembling, eyes wide, pointing at me. I couldn't hear their words clearly, only the urgency, the fear. But one thing was undeniable. Their description matched what I had seen in the footage. Creature, aggressive, human in shape, yet far from human in movement. I tried to speak, tried to tell them it was me, that it had to be me, but my voice didn't carry. It was raw, guttural, almost alien. The sight of their fear, the confirmation of what I already suspected, pushed me deeper into panic. I ran, faster than I had any right to, sprinting through the streets as though the full moon itself was propelling me. And in the echo of my own heartbeat, I understood the full weight of it. I could hurt someone. I could destroy something innocent without even realizing it. I returned to my apartment, shaking, exhausted, terror clawing at my chest. I locked the door. I tied my hands. It didn't matter. I could feel the strength building in me again, the tension in my muscles, the primal instinct coiling like a spring, the hunger, the aggression, the uncontrollable need all pressing forward. I had tried to contain it, rationalize it, deny it, and failed. I sank to the floor, hands tied but body still restless, mind screaming against a reality I had glimpsed. I couldn't trust myself. I couldn't trust what came after dark. Every sound outside the apartment, every shadow, every rustle of movement became a threat I couldn't ignore. And in that moment, I realized that whatever had begun last night was far from over. I was no longer just a witness to the night. I had become part of it. My eyes darted to the window. The full moon hung high, glaring down at me, white and indifferent. I could feel it pulling at me again, calling, demanding. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, a prayer I wasn't sure I even believed. Please, don't let me hurt anyone. Please, don't let me lose control. I tried to hide from it. I tried to lock it away in the corners of my mind, to pretend the last nights were just nightmares, hallucinations. But the evidence, the scratches, the blood, the footage, the witness reports refused to be ignored. And then, in the dim light of the apartment, I saw it. I had been avoiding mirrors, avoiding any reflection that could betray what my body had become. But exhaustion and desperation finally drew me to the bathroom. I flipped on the light. My hands were shaking as I leaned closer. And there it was, not the human I had believed myself to be, but something else entirely. Eyes sharper, amber-tinted, almost glowing in the light, jaw tense, the fine hairs on my arms standing straight, and my nails, claws curved unnaturally, tipped with a faint trace of dried blood. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't turn away, and my reflection moved in a way I didn't expect. Every twitch of the muscles, every subtle shift, reminded me of the movements I had seen in the footage. I froze, chest tight, heart hammering, and then it came together. The memory fragments, suppressed or erased, returned in flashes, moments I had blacked out from before. The aggression, the blood, the hunts. I had done it before. Not just once. Not just last night. I whispered the word aloud, and the sound of my own voice almost broke me. I didn't turn into a werewolf. I already was one. The realization hit with a force I could barely comprehend. This wasn't something that had just started. The blackouts, the bursts of strength, the heightened senses, they had always been a part of me. Hidden beneath layers I had chosen to ignore or that my mind had forced me to forget, patterns emerged. Every full moon, every time the hunger became unbearable, every night that left me waking in horror, hands stained with blood I didn't remember shedding. It had all happened before, and my body had buried the truth that I sank to the floor, breathing hard, shaking. My eyes darted to the phone. Security footage, news reports, the scratches, the neighbors' terrified eyes, all of it aligned now. I wasn't just a victim of circumstance. I was the source. Every attack, every report, every missing hour pointed back to me. The evidence wasn't accidental. It was a record of what I had always been capable of, a record I had refused to see. And then came the dark thought I tried to push away. Someone else had known. Someone close. The neighbor pacing at night, whispering, observing. Perhaps they had been covering for me. Perhaps they had always known, waiting for me to face the truth. The idea twisted inside my chest. How long had this been happening? How many nights? How many people? How many memories have been suppressed? hidden away by my own mind or by someone else's intervention. I remember the news report again, the person injured, the animal attack in the alley. My stomach churned. That victim had been real, and I had been there. I had been the one. The connection was personal now, intimate, unavoidable. Every detail of the night, every mark on my body, every sound I'd ignored, all pointed to truth. I could no longer deny it. I felt it again, deep inside, the pull of the full moon through the window. Hunger, aggression, instincts I could no longer fight. And as I stared at the reflection of the creature in the mirror, part human, part something else, I realized the full horror of it. I wasn't just losing control. I had always been this way. The blackouts, the strength, the memory gaps weren't random. They were the body asserting what the mind refused to accept. And in that moment, the terror became complete. I had been the predator all along. And the night, the full moon, the shadows, they were calling me back again. There would be no escape. Only memory, only reflection, only the truth of what I already was. After hours on the floor, staring at my reflection, I tried to convince myself I could stop it. I made plans. I cleared my apartment. Chains and ropes. Heavy locks on doors and windows. I even considered leaving the city, driving far away from the streets that had witnessed my transformation. Anything to contain what I had become, to prevent another night like last night, to protect the people I might hurt. But deep down I knew, deep down, I felt it stirring again. The subtle tension in my muscles, the sharp ache in my senses, the hunger simmering just beneath the surface that had returned, slow and patient, like a pulse I could no longer escape. I could hear faint sounds outside the apartment, a soft rustle, a whisper of movement in the alleys, the distant echo of footsteps or claws. Something was out there, waiting, watching, and it was not alone that I tried to reassure myself. Maybe it was just my imagination, maybe the neighbor, the creature, or whatever had been covering for me. Maybe it was done, but then I caught the reflection of the moonlight on the window pane, silver and round, and the hair on my arms rose, every nerve alert. The pull was returning. The night was calling, and I realized with a sinking dread that the cycle had already begun again. I shivered as I looked at my hands, still raw, still trembling. I had thought I could contain it. I had hoped that logic, distance, and restraint would hold it back. But the truth was undeniable. It could not be stopped. It was a part of me, and it had its own schedule, its own rules, its own hunger, and it was patient, waiting for the moment when I could no longer resist. I tried to speak, to warn someone, anyone, but words failed me. My voice sounded strange, hollow, like the echo of my own fear. And as I moved toward the door, I heard a low growl, faint but unmistakable, coming from somewhere just outside. Not from the street, not from the neighbor, from the shadows themselves. I froze, realizing the awful possibility. I wasn't alone. And whatever was out there, it knew me that I sank to the floor again, chest tight, trying to control the panic rising inside me. My eyes darted to the window. The moon hung high, bright, insistent. I could already feel it pulling at me, stretching through the bones and sinew, tugging at the instincts I had fought to suppress. And then, almost instinctively, I whispered, a warning I barely understood myself. Tonight is a full moon, and I can already feel it starting. A shadow shifted across the room behind me, silent and deliberate. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My body was tense, aware of its own danger, aware of something else in the room that mirrored me, mirrored the hunger I carried. The sound of claws scraping lightly against the floor echoed faintly, and I knew, without needing to see it, that this night was only beginning. And if you're hearing this, stay inside tonight. If you think this could be real, type full moon in the comments and tell me, what would you have done differently?